Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
This episode of the Talent Equation podcast is brought to you by a new book out called Conversations for the Journey, 40 Ways for You to Build Sporting Character by Richard Shorter for Non-Perfect Dad. I have Richard with me at the moment. Richard, there's so much rich information in the book. Can you pick out one of your favourites in terms of the conversations, the things that you think is going to have the biggest impact for parents and coaches out there?
Brilliant, thank you, Stuart. Well, when I travel around and go into different schools or kind of talent environments, I often ask coaches, what's one of the big takeaways you want for parents from the parents' meeting that I'm going to deliver? And often around allowing children to be self-organised and parents not kind of mollycoddling their children. So question 8 is, I'm your parent, not your slave. And the question is, when would it be most helpful for you to take responsibility for your own sporting arrangements? And really, it's an opportunity for parents and children to start to talk about when is it right for a child to pack their own bag, what happens if kit is forgotten, who needs to be thinking about snack, drink, etc., etc. And I think because as parents we were doing that for our kids when we were younger, we probably go a lot older with those type of responsibilities, which actually makes them a bit dependent on us. And of course, there's the disorganized kid, and that's just one of those things. Some people just have a disorganized trait. But for me, I think coaches are looking to enable parents to let their kids kind of take control of their own sporting journey.
Brilliant. Again, couldn't be more timely. So my son, Evan, 10 years old, went to the rugby pitch the other day and failed to put his rugby boots in his bag. Fortunately for him, we live 200 yards away from the rugby pitch, so we were able to go and recover them. However, he still lost fortnight privileges for a week for failing to take organisation, which he'd agreed to. And so there's some learning to be done there. So it's a very, very live. Hey, look, there's so much more in the book. How do people get hold of it? And I believe you've also got a kind of a bit of a special deal for multiple purchases if whole teams or clubs want to get hold of the book.
Yeah, I'd really encourage coaches if you go to my website, Non-Perfect Dad, which is non-perfectdad.co.uk /talent equation. You'll see a team pack deal there, which is to get 25, and that's the cheapest way of getting 25 I've kind of ever offered. And with that pack comes 10 ways to use that pack with your parents. So it might be you give your parents a copy of the book and a thank you card from their child for their effort for the season. It might be you're going on tour and you want to raise a little bit of extra money, and so you can sell them on hire and get a bit of extra money for tour. There are lots of different ideas in there for how you as a coach might continually resource parents to engage in healthy conversations with their children that nurture that character and mindset young people need to be successful on and off the sports pitch.
I know loads of coaches are looking for ways in which they can engage parents more effectively. And so the fact that you've got that solution out there that's like a win-win proposition. So encourage everybody to get out there and buy that. It should be like the best Christmas present you can give to all the kids, all the parents and all the kids in your club. And I think it will pay you back in spades. So Richard, highly recommended. Everybody get out there and use the link and get hold of this book. It will give you endless value.
Right then. Right. We're here, overlooking
the Waterloo canopy. Is it called that?
I don't know.
It is now, isn't it?
So we definitely have best views, but it's got a certain charm about it. But we're in my hotel room in London, and I have finally tracked down and managed to pin down A good friend. I'd definitely like to call him a good friend. He might not reciprocate. But a good friend and somebody who I've definitely wanted to be on this podcast. And when I started out on this podcasting journey, one person I thought I'd love to have a podcast conversation with is Andrew Gilott. Welcome.
Thanks.
And so, Andrew, the starting point is, as always with this podcast, is just tell me about your crazy journey, your crazy career, and how you've arrived doing what you do. And actually, it'd be worth talking a little bit about what you do, if you can describe it.
Yeah, it is. What all the way back?
Well, I mean, you can be as concise or as lengthy as you like. There's no time limits on this podcast. I can make it into a two-parter if you want to.
60-minute intro. And then after that, so I am a I'm a coach developer. The work that I do is coach development. I'm a one-trick pony in the sense that although I do a variety of different things in different contexts, it ultimately draws on the same kind of ideas, same concepts, same limited knowledge and skills. So that's definitely what I do. And some of what I do now, but not all, is that I have a fractional contract with the English Institute of Sport as a coaching lead. And that leads me in that team to also be working around coaching within UK sport, and then outside of that, I'm fortunate enough to, at the moment, for example, to be working with another nation around doing some coach development work, and also a professional sport, which is a dead interesting piece of work. Because in that professional sport, I'm trying to apply the same kind of ideas and concepts and limited knowledge and skills that I have to work with the talent scouts for the senior England team in that sport. So it's all really about knowledge in action. I think that's what it is. Where it started, it seems crazy, but it makes lots of sense to me. In that, so I was playing music and trying to make a living doing that, and to cut what would be a very long story short, in a long, circuitous kind of way, ended up teaching in music and music technology and recording and those kind of things, as well as working on some commercial projects. And out of that, realised that I wasn't being very kind to my body and myself as a consequence of that kind of life, and so sort of ended up at a point in my life where I was a teacher, a head of a department within a higher education establishment, with really enjoying but not having enough time with students, being really concerned with how my colleagues got better and how we supported them to do that, and I felt it as well. Like, how did I get better as a teacher within a, ironically within an institute of learning, and yet there's very little opportunity to learn. And as an amateur sports person, and had gone fully evangelical in the way that people do, so that if you meet Olympic athletes who are in your sport and you tell them how hard you train, they go, Jesus Christ, I'd be so knackered if I did that. That kind of. So I've reached that point in my life, and as a consequence of that, I made some contacts and was invited to go for an interview for a job with British Cycling in 2006, I think, and that was the bridge across. And from there, I worked there for a number of years, but also as a consequence of that, in 2009, got an opportunity to start working for the Olympic Solidarity Programme based out of Lausanne, and being able to go to different countries and interact with different coaches in really different contexts. And then a lot of things happened, and here we are. But it does make sense to me in the sense that ultimately it's always been about it's been about communicating with people. It's about learning and teaching, and even before I went into teaching, it was about communicating with people. It's just at that stage of my life, I wouldn't have thought of as music and art and theatre and those kind of things as being about that necessarily. They were more about vehicles for me being able to have like a massive house, which of course I never got. But I realise now it was also about communicating with people.
Interesting. So it's interesting. You're not the first person who's been on the podcast who has come from what you might call performance art, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's music or other areas.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how people with that kind of background, it always surprises me that they kind of end up in the sports space. But I guess what you've alluded to there is just this kind of love of connection with other human beings and trying to strengthen that somehow, either through a medium like music or, in this case, through a sports experience, and trying to enhance that sports experience. So would you say that's a common thread?
Yeah, although if I was really honest, the reason I was really attracted to working in sport is because I saw the glamour of the podium programme and thought, God, I just want to be part of that. Of course, that's not how I feel now at all. I'm just being very, very honest. That I meet people who go, no, for me it was just always about helping the children, and I think it wasn't. Well, of course, for some people it definitely was, and it is. I think it is for you in many ways. It's not just the children, but helping people. But I think for me it was. I was just really excited by the whole thing. Of course, I feel quite differently now being in it. But if I'm brutally honest, I think it was that. I was really excited about the opportunity to work in what seemed like quite a glamorous performance environment, far more glamorous than music performance, or, as you will know, I've worked in performance circus as well. So, and any bits of sound to picture, for example, I've been involved in. It felt quite performance. It's had a presence. It's had a stage, if you like. So I was really attracted to that. All of the rationalising about it being about people and communication definitely came later.
Right.
Definitely came later. But and I'm not sure if this is tangential, but I don't think it really matters. It's hard to get out of the sense that you are having a conversation rather than we're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
But certainly I think I spent the first 6, 7, 8 years in sport trying to hide. Might be a bit too strong a word, hide, but not allude to the fact that I didn't come from the world of sport,
right?
And that I'd done a humanities degree and English literature and all of that stuff that was obviously not very exciting and not relevant. I really felt that, Yeah. And in fact, out of intellectual embarrassment, when I went to cycling, I did a master's in applied sport and exercise science part-time, and because it really felt like I should. it felt like everybody had a ology and everyone had at least an MSc in anology, and I thought, all right, well, I need to change track and go and do that.
Yeah.
But there was also definitely a point, probably about me becoming comfortable.
Sorry to interrupt, but then you realised after you did that what everybody else has already realised, which is that's actually pointless.
It was utterly pointless.
And actually, your humanities degree probably stood you in far better stead.
Well, that's true. And I draw on just my experiences in teaching every single day. But yeah, so I did, and I also felt that there was a growing acceptance. Maybe there's a bit of a perfect storm. It sounds like quite a sexy phrase to use, perfect storm. It might have been a perfect storm. Imagine, what are you wearing in this storm? But there's this perfect storm of people beginning to think more broadly about what sport means and sport performance means, even at the highest level. That phrase that wasn't coined by me, I don't know who it was, maybe you do, but about we don't need more sport science, we need more sport humanity.
Yeah.
And and so there became a point when actually it suddenly went from wanting to not talk about it, or when people said, which sports university did you go to, you go, oh look over there, and try and distract them, to actually genuinely wanting to have a conversation with them and say, well, I did this and I learned this and I really enjoyed this.
I went to a sports university and I used to do that.
Yeah, right. Well, there we go. So there's been a change.
I just spoke at my alumni event last night, talking about prospective graduates about careers and stuff like that, and I'm being a bit unfair on them. But it was a bit like that where I went to, because it was a sort of an up and coming university, and back in the day, when after I graduated, it was a bit like, where did you go? And everyone's saying, they'd say like Loughborough or Brunel or wherever, and look over there. Anyway, sorry.
Well, I don't think I've got any more to carry on with, really. It's just it was that there was a change and it became okay, and now a significant amount of work I do and conversations I have are really informed by work which is related to, which is connected back to that kind of work, and also let's not forget, I'm about to do a little session at the Royal Northern College of Music next Tuesday, actually, with a bunch of coaches who are attending the UK Sport World Class Conference, and it's really not surprising to me, but I'm hoping it's interesting to them, the parallels, which are so strong, parallels of thinking about, so from a coaching perspective, when do we play and when do we play? So how do we, if you like, periodise creativity and performance? There are clearly fundamentals of skill acquisition at work at all times, because we are acquiring skills.
Yes.
It's fundamentally a technical pursuit, is learning to, say, play an instrument or read music or do the two together. Something that I never really quite mastered, do the two together. It's a bit like singing and playing the bass. That's impossible, isn't it? Apart from Sting, and that's why he's a bit weird. In Motorhead, what's his name? Lemmy.
Yeah.
Oh no, and
Paul McCartney.
Oh
Didn't he play the
god,
bass?
yeah, and Black Sabbath.
It's quite a lot of
In fact,
maybe it's really easy. Maybe it's just you that couldn't do it.
I can't do it. Anyway, you get the point, right? So what they're concerned with in any conservatoire is not that I'm an expert in conservatoires, but what I see them being interested in is learning environments, acquisition of skill, representative learning design, technical acquisition. How does that translate into performances? When do we play and when do we play? Those issues about uncertainty and ambiguity and knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, all of that stuff. It's the same, just a bit different.
Right. So you've literally just said in about 3 sentences what could be the entire focus area for this conversation. I want to come back to this though. You talked about, and you just sort of just said it like it was nothing, but for me this is a really interesting concept, so I'm going to explore it.
Go for it.
Which is periodising creativity.
Yeah.
So when do we play and when do we play? That's a really interesting idea, because I think a lot of people might listen to this podcast and get the message, and genuinely sometimes this is the message, which is, let's actually get away from the idea that it's always got to be about improvement and focus and all that. And don't get me wrong, there's always that element, definitely, always that idea. But one of the big messages I'm trying to get across to people is, in order to do that, you don't have to just get rid of the idea of it being an enjoyable experience. It doesn't have to immediately get rid of that and become something else, which is often where the high performance world may have gone. Hence the point of, we don't need more sports science, we need more sports humanity. And I definitely want to circle back to that. But so this idea of play and this idea of creative endeavour, but it's a periodised thing. I'm interested in just expand on that even thought fragment for me.
Yeah, okay, well, so the first thing is that although I think periodised is the right word, when someone says it back, it's a bit jarring because it suddenly sounds like you're trying to sciencify something.
Yeah.
But
I know what the sentiment of it is, though.
But it's more about finding a place for it, slotting it in.
Yeah.
When ultimately you have got performance milestones, there's nothing you can do about that, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, there's nothing you want to do about that. That's why the program you're working on, in my context, that's why it exists. It doesn't exist for any other reason.
Yeah.
So it's the slotting in. How do you put it in the diary? Would be just as good a phrase. It's just not quite as perfect storm as periodisation, is it? But that period, it is. How do you find a place for it? Because, and for me,
feels a little bit like diarising sex.
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah.
I'll be with you at 10:30 on Friday.
I just want you to know that this is on. It's recorded.
And there is just the two of us in a hotel room.
Exactly, yeah. So I don't mind what you do or say, but I just want you to know it's on there.
Okay.
So it is finding time for it, and so I'll expand on it in that way. Periodisation. I'm certainly not trying to sciencify that.
Yeah.
But I think there are some important questions around that. They exist in some of the music conservatoires. They definitely exist in sport, where those periods of creativity and play, they're obviously much more complex situations than saying to people, right, why don't you just try something else now?
Yeah.
Because being able to try something else involves quite a lot of context and thinking and skills and knowledge to be able to do that.
Risk.
So just even risk taking.
Yeah.
If it's something that you've not experienced and learnt you can do, or get away with, or it's okay to do, then that in itself is really quite difficult. And then we might expect, I suppose, I'm no authority on this, and as you know, I'm very sensitive about not coming across as authority in anything. But and I understand I'm doing a splendid job of that, but there surely has to be a risk there within a cycle, performance cycle of trying something with a great deal of confidence, perhaps having to build a significant amount of confidence to do that. It not going terribly well at all, which is quite normal.
Yeah.
And then there really not being enough time from a coaching perspective to debrief from that, pick up the pieces, really carefully examine what the consequences of that and what the implications are, and get back on to the performance.
Yeah.
There has to be enough space for you to be able to dust yourself off, take something positive from it and move on, right?
Yeah.
So that gap it feels to me like it's dead important. Knowing how in the first place to do it feels like it's dead important.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be creative or look for alternative solutions to established problems, then you would want, I suppose, thinking about, you might hypothesise that, well, if I tried this, it might ultimately lead to this, and this bit might find its way into my performance. I don't even know now if I'm talking about music or sport, but I'm talking about something.
Yeah.
So that period of being able to identify what you think you've created in this creative phase, that's what creative phases do, they create stuff.
Yeah.
And being able to make sense of that, and then look for the, if you like, the artefacts, the fragments of that in the final performance. Go, oh, right, I can really see that the thing that we did there together was a consequence of that creative thing that we did 6 months ago.
Yeah.
All of that is a really, really big, complex process that I think needs the athlete and the coach to somehow schedule, think carefully about, not it just happen as a consequence of happenstance.
It strikes me, whether it's by design or by happenstance, that let's take music as a concept and maybe look just comparisons, is that musicians perhaps intuitively, perhaps it's just how they're made, it's just, you know, that kind of non-conformist side. But I kind of know that or sense it in the sense that when, and I'm not particularly musical, so I'm definitely not talking from a position of any kind of knowledge, but it's just a sense I have based on maybe just stories of musical brilliance, but the genuine moments of creativity and the genuine moments of brilliance that then lead to either great recordings or great performances often come from places where there is just pure freedom and an opportunity to play. You know, it's literally that, you know, somebody's literally sitting around in a room and all of a sudden just plays around with a particular chord or something, and someone goes, "Oh, do that again," and then the next thing, that starts a cascade moment that lends itself up into some of the greatest musical hits we've ever heard of. And it strikes me, just want to finish this thought bit up, it strikes me that we don't really do that in sport. That's not allowed, because there always has to be some kind of outcome we're working towards. And I've had some debates recently with people where I'm sort of wrestling with this idea, which is to say, I think the context is sometimes different. So in the performance context, you know, you're up against it all the time, and there's performances. In the world of, say, grassroots sport, or where there's children in a developmental process where we've got 10 years, in my mind it feels like it should be more like that. Here's some time to experiment and explore, and let's see what comes out of that. Might be nothing, might be something great. So I suppose maybe that's what I'm trying to sort of allude to, try and sort of bridge some parallels, but maybe I'm doing too much.
No, you're provoking lots of thoughts, but I'm not sure I agree. So I mean, I have two contexts. I work in performance sport, and I have a son who is right in that developmental stage, who just loves to play sport, and hopefully loves to play sport because we've just said it's just there to be enjoyed, just that's all it's there for.
Yeah.
So I really recognise both contexts that you're talking about. I think in my work as a coach developer is in performance sport, and so I have to recognise some of the logistical challenges. In fact, the constant logistical resource challenges, resource and energy, time and energy being the two most fundamental resources at stake here in just experimenting. I know why people would feel nervous about that. I think you have to understand that lots of us are probably involved in processes that where someone says, "Why don't you just kind of like arse about for a bit?" You know, I'd love to, but I really can't. I need to get on with this now. So there's that challenge, and also I wonder what we experiment with. There are some building blocks in that experimentation, aren't there? Mm-hmm. And I'm minded of the words by the great philosopher Nana Cherry, who, to paraphrase, she'd said, to paraphrase, and I'm sure someone who listens to your podcast will know this off by heart, but I'll have to paraphrase it, which is the idea that if you don't know the fundamental your scales, the fundamentals of music, then you can't improvise.
Okay.
And she said it sounds like a piano falling down some stairs.
Yeah. That
bit I think is right, it's part of the quote.
Yeah.
So that improvisation comes about by some technical knowledge and understanding of environment and skill execution, and of course that's going to look different at 11, the age of my son, than it is on a performance program. But I think that I'm not suggesting we put structure into those creative moments necessarily. I'm suggesting that naturally there are some foundations even for these phases of experimentation.
So okay, that's really interesting, because, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I might disagree with a word you used. You used the word technical, so a technical basis. I think we have become a little bit overly interested in that. So we assume, right, unless you have, and I've heard this argument a lot of times, and I'm not saying I don't I'm not saying I don't agree with it. I just think that we might have got this wrong. So the idea is that what we need to have is a technical understanding of an activity, and in this case, sports, right? As in, we need to be able to do the techniques. And I believe that we need to have an appreciation of the activity. What is the game asking you to do? And there are various ways of solving the problem the game asks you to do, but we spend so much time kind of giving the solutions that we never allow anybody to discover any alternative. So in the musical context, it's almost like, I hear what you're saying, you know, being able to play the scales, understand, but actually maybe it's more about having an appreciation of kind of what music is and what it could be and what it might sound like and the ways in which it could be created, as opposed to, and this is where the analogy might break down, because in music it might be you do actually have to be able to play the keys or strum the strings, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, so actually, of course, and you will know this from the way you've described it, I would entirely agree with you. You know that. So whether or not my language led you to think that I was thinking that we needed to understand techniques in order to be...
I knew that.
You know that I was...
Just the clarification I wanted to get.
But there's a point there about being able to... I don't really know what the analogy is, but you used it around strumming the strings, for example.
This is, you're already starting to pick up on my lack of musical.
I can tell you're like a virtuoso. No, but there's an important point, which that's a technical activity, actually, isn't it? You know, there's a technicality to that.
Yeah.
I think that's what
how you do that matters.
I know that's what I meant. Well, being able to do it matters.
Yes.
You don't necessarily have to be. You don't need to be able to do it dead well to experiment, but you need to be able to do it right.
Yeah.
There's a difference, and so the great philosopher Naina Cherry talks about knowing scales. But actually, what we're really talking about, it's probably the better analogy, is just understanding that when you play that note and that note, they sound all right together.
Yeah.
Because I've done it before.
Yeah. And
when I play that note and that note, they sound horrible together, and that might be a cool thing sometimes.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, it's not a cool thing because it makes people's ears prick up and they don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's technicality at that level. It's about having enough, being able to. I suppose in sport and music, it's about being able to use your body in time and space, isn't it?
Yes.
And
your senses. Yeah.
Not that there might be a prescribed way of doing that.
Yeah.
Or that there's a series of things you have to be able to do in a certain order before you're allowed to move on to this next thing.
Yeah.
But you definitely can't experiment if you have literally no idea how to pick up this instrument or what other people might do in response to you, because that's about interpersonal relationships within a team, for example.
Yeah.
So that is technical.
Right.
And maybe, I mean, I'm interested by this on-running debate, which only seems to exist in social media. It doesn't exist in real life, does it? About whether or not it's okay to talk about techniques or drills or whatever it is.
Well, I think I might have created some of that, but anyway.
Well, I love the fact it's so emotive, because not least because I imagine how emotive people get about those kind of things. Imagine what they might do in a really sort of genuinely emotive situation. God, I bet some of those people fall in love really, really, and imagine how they fall out of love.
Oh, God, yeah.
Like traipsing the streets for days. I can imagine they get hit hard by everything, but yeah, it's emotive in a way.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's somewhat about everybody thinking they know what they mean when they use a phrase like technique.
Yes.
And actually, we don't all mean the same thing. We're not talking about the same degree, same intensity. I don't know.
No, you're right though, but I think the reason it exercises, I think, some people or people so much, I think, is because everybody is just trying to do it a little bit better. And again, it comes down to, and it's ambiguous because, you know, we sometimes look to science to help us, and science in this context doesn't always necessarily have particularly good and concrete answers, because human beings are complex and context matters, and the individual matters, and what's going to help you get better might not help me get better, and so it's not a perfect thing, and never will it be. And I'm not trying to suggest. I've never been trying to suggest that it is, and I've never been trying to say that it isn't this or it isn't that. I think what I've always tried to say, though, is probably just being deliberately provocateur, is to say we've done this for a long time, and there might be some alternatives. So what if we switched that bit off and forced ourselves to do something else? We didn't have that available for a while. Then what if we was to do something else? What could that look like? What could it be? How could we explore that? And I've just sort of taken that stance, really, which is to say, I've been doing that for ages. So now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to stop that. Maybe, and that might be detrimental, potentially, but in order to purely explore something else, I'm going to limit myself in that respect. It's a little bit like being a vegan, I suppose.
like a drills vegan. Is that what you are?
Maybe I am. Well, vegans can become very. I don't want to. By the way, any vegans out there, I don't want to be critical of your dietary choices.
I don't want to eat you.
Yeah, because to be fair, vegans can be quite aggressive when it comes to dietary conversations. I'm digging myself a hole. But what I mean is no. But I've heard this. I mean, I've heard that people are very passionate about veganism and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not criticising it. I'm just saying that people make a choice like that deliberately because they're sort of saying, I actually want to take a different route. And they deliberately say, that's not something for me anymore. And sometimes that can be quite a stark thing. And then they become a bit evangelical about it. And I know that I veer into that space sometimes.
Being evangelical about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose in some ways I'd love to just nod and agree, because I think that's just like a really nice thing to do over a beer, looking over the Waterloo canopy, isn't it? But I wonder if I suppose thinking about what you might do in your day job context when someone says, well, I think I've just decided to abstain from drills for the time being. I'm abstaining, and it's for Drill December or whatever it is. Drill Denver or whatever.
Drill Denver! What a brilliant... You heard it here first, folks.
Someone's sponsoring me to not use any drills in December or whatever it is.
Drill Denver.
But I am minded of this idea that that the problem is everything works, and one of the underlying problems, I suppose, in deciding whether or not one paradigm's right or another's right or some combination is that the degree to which you're clear on exactly what it is you're trying to get out of a given situation is probably very important. So, if you're if you're in a situation where you've got a young, I think you coach a young squad of loads of different sports, like cricket and rugby and hockey and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm just imagining that if you've got a group of, and it is that, hypothesising, like I don't have good experience of this, but a group of 9-year-old girls and boys playing hockey together or soccer together or rugby together or whatever it is, and what you want them to see is to gradually make progress in being able to throw the ball, hit the ball, pass, whatever. You're still laughing at Denver. we should. Yeah, I'm sure you could do something with that. But and so you want to see them make gradual progress in that area, and you also want to see that they're really enjoying their sport and all of that stuff. It strikes me that if you decide to abstain because it's Drill Denver,
stop it. This is like an Agassiz. Anyway, go on, carry on.
You're still going to see what you're looking for.
Yes.
Which is that they're playing, they're getting to know the game, getting to know each other, they're probably going to make improvements, and they're going to make good relationships and going to enjoy it. As a consequence, you go, do you know what, I'm pretty sure they're actually making more progress and they're enjoying it more than they were before.
Yeah.
So lots of factors at work in that, but one of them is surely that they're just making progress. The problem is everything works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
However, if you are working with a squad of 19-year-old men or women, working on very, very specific things that you need to see very specific, quite marginal or incremental outcomes in, because you've been working on this for ages and years and years and years.
Yeah.
I think the question of whether or not one thing works better than another becomes more exposed, and leads me to think that coaches working in that environment are much more likely or would benefit from trying pretty much everything at their disposal, blending things, not having a drilled ember, maybe.
So in your experience, is part of that then that in that context where the outcomes become far more acute, as in, I always talk about form of life a lot, so the context that the individual finds themselves in, the social space, the political space, etc.
Skills have history, right?
Yeah, and that has a big role in a methodology they might adopt or an approach they might take, and this, that and the other. But for a lot of people, I think that they're not mindful of that, in the sense that, so firstly they just act in a certain way because the environment, they feel like the environment makes them do so.
Yeah.
And then part of your role as a coach developer, I suppose, is to allow them to understand that and to look at that through a lens to go, actually, this might be the right way, but it might also not be, and what could be the relative merits of various different approaches? Is that kind of part of the role?
Yeah, I suppose. The answer is yes. My experience in the way that I do the job, and I'm still managing to pay the mortgage. Is certainly not to say, oh, look, why don't you try this? That's not what I do at all.
Okay.
So the starting point for any change is where people would always be that although you might have done quite a lot of background work and provocation, ultimately change starts, in my experience, with someone saying, I'd like to change something, please. Maybe not in those words, but I would like to change something. Mm-hmm. Although, just like everybody in their job, I've acted really unskillfully and without the adequate knowledge and understanding on probably more times than I have when I've had everything I needed. But of course that's just about a practitioner making their way through the career.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think that where I am right now, and have been for maybe a couple of years, is that on most occasions people they ask for support rather than you impose that upon them. So I wouldn't say, why don't we try something else? But I might say, can I just be much clearer about what we're trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
And the more clarity we have around what we're trying to get out, the more likely we are to see that actually what we're getting isn't quite what we wanted.
Yeah.
And often it's quite stark, the difference between what we wanted and what we've got. So that's definitely how most of that work on a daily, weekly, monthly basis feels. It's definitely not I can see you doing some drills, but let's do something else, for example, talking about drilled ember. I just wanted to hit you with drilled ember again.
I've just about got over it.
I know, that's why I wanted to hit you again with it. But it isn't that. And often, I suppose, so my friend and colleague Bob Muir at Leeds Beckett University had a lovely way of phrasing this some years ago, which was around, if you like, that when we see somebody working, they're revealing to us lots of things that they believe.
Yeah.
And I, at that time, that really struck me and was influential. And so I suppose sometimes that work might look like, to paraphrase, right, so Stuart, I've seen that you're doing this kind of work. I can see that you're a drill vegan and that you're trying to achieve these kind of things. And the way that you were working has made me think that you perhaps believe this about the way that young people or adults learn, and that this is the best kind of learning environment to create, etc., etc. And as you go through these, if you like, what you've spoken to me, what this situation has told me is that these are the things you believe. Metaphorically, you might go, actually, AG, I don't believe that at all. You go, oh, that's really interesting, because if we think about what you were doing, can you see how I might have come to the conclusion that you think this? Well, that isn't what I think. I think this. Right. So is there a better strategy of achieving that? And it's a slow and deliberate and iterative process, but I think it always starts with someone saying, okay, I'm in light of our conversation, or in light of that piece of stimulated feedback, or whatever it is, I now feel like I would like to try and find something else to solve the problem. And then I say, okay, well, I'll try and help you with that. I want it to feel like that.
So is there a moment of I'm trying to think about that in a way, because it's like, in some respects, there's a lot of what we talk about on a daily basis, is that often the conversation is about drills and games, but I actually think that's actually just it's almost like a proxy for a different conversation. The conversation is, what do you believe about other human beings' experiences within a sports context, and how they might learn?
Yeah.
And I think that's possibly, coming back to what you said about emotive, that's kind of where the emotion comes from, because often it's challenging a belief.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I don't find it emotive at all. I know that in the environments that I find myself in, I don't really ever see. I don't think I ever see just isolated techniques and drills. But I suppose in a way I don't really think about that. I don't expect to see it. It's people are trying to get really good at sport, and I suppose I always imagine that maybe at some point much earlier in that athlete's history, those kind of practices might have taken place. Despite the fact I totally understand, I really do understand why it is that a number of practitioners, including yourself, are really wanting to explore whether or not that needs to happen at all in an athlete's lifetime, or a young person's sporting biography.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, it never really goes through my mind, because I don't see it. I see lots of beliefs about adult learning and skill acquisition and practice design and just what sport is for human beings that seem like a little bit not quite right. But frequently that isn't because people have a little bit not quite right idea about sport. It's because they're really struggling to channel what they're trying to achieve through the knowledge and skills they've got available to them at any point in time.
Yes.
They're not. I mean, I don't think I've ever met a coach who isn't 100% laser guided, focused on wanting to help someone else to get better.
Yes.
And yet, this conversation, these kind of conversations, can easily stray into using what I think are some really terrible ways of talking about coaches. Like, they begin with coaches can't, coaches don't, coaches won't. I mean, but I don't really recognise these as being the way that coaches I've met at all levels of sport, the sporting pathway. I don't recognise people who say they won't or determinedly can't do something. I just see people who want to help, and they use the best tools and resources available to them. And sometimes it's true that when they open the toolbox up, they just go, right, I can see the problem's a nail and I've got 50 hammers, which one shall I use? Yes. Of course, but they're the people who need our support, not a charitable campaign that runs throughout December 2019. For example, celebrating drill veganism.
As effective as that might be.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, it might be very effective.
Well, yes,
we could monetize it.
But that's not to say. That's not to say that So I would actually agree with you if I felt that everybody was coming from that position. And part of the reason, I suppose, for my so-called, my perhaps seems to follow me around, my militancy, if you like, is because I'm driven by two things. One is I'm obviously driven by helping somebody to get better, as we all are, but I'm also driven by an idea that if I can do whatever I can to allow that to take place without compromising what that individual might want from an experience. So let's take your son who's have a great sporting experience, right? So what do they really want from that sports experience? What are they coming for? Well, the likelihood is they're not necessarily coming for training, in inverted commas, and to get better. You must come and get training to get better. They're not necessarily coming from that. They're coming for a whole range of other things. One of which might be to actually play the game.
Yeah.
And so a part of me is I'm trying to explore, right, what's the way in which I can try and stay true to that ideal, and yet still, without sacrificing the opportunity of getting better at the same time.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've found a magic answer, and I think I'll always be searching for a better way of doing that. I'm happy with that. Where I struggle is when somebody has such conviction that they know, and the way they do it is the way. I mean, I've never said this is the way. I've always said this is a way that I'm currently on a journey with, and I know I'm getting it wrong. And actually there may be some consequences to that, in the sense that I do know sometimes the kids I'm coaching perhaps aren't as technically adept. In fact, we had a festival at the weekend and there were kids there who were really good and could do stuff that my kids can't do. And the reason my kids can't do it is I haven't taught them to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm okay with that, on the basis that they might learn to do it themselves. It may be at some point that they may need to be taught to do it, and they may say to me, "Hey coach, can you teach me how to do that? Because that kid's dead good." And we'll have a conversation about that. But I've taken a sort of position of I'm happy with that, because I want them to come to me saying that they need to do something because there's a problem in the game they can't solve, rather than me say to them, here's a solution to a problem you've not yet needed, but you're going to need it at some point. And I suppose that there's a lot in that.
Just-in-case pedagogy versus just-in-time pedagogy, right?
Bingo, yeah.
Gosh, there's lots in that, isn't there?
Yeah, sorry, I ranted.
It's a good rant. So I hear everything you're saying about your kids, and my kid is one of those kids, not in your squad, but similarly, plays rugby. Lots of things that he can't do, lots of things that he can do, including really enjoying himself. Are there things that could change within his the coaching he receives? Almost certainly, but I have to say that also I have such a huge amount of respect for what his coach does with the resources available to him.
Yeah.
And the bigger point there is about the resources available, I think, because even if someone does take the view, so maybe what's coming out here, because I'm noticing the difference between us as well as the similarities, is that I have to forge relationships with people and find a way in which I can help them. And so even if they do feel militantly that there is only one way of doing things, well, there's a reason for that as well. And it's unlikely to be, I want to make the players' lives a misery. But it's more like, I've found a way and it really works, which for me, I suppose, again, the closer to grassroots sport you get, the less scrutiny I think there is on the specific outcomes from training sessions and games. That's why I said
I would love to think that, but actually, weirdly, I think it'll, whether it's perceived or real.
Yeah, right. That's why I said I think.
Yeah.
I think it should be the case.
I think you're absolutely right about it should be the case. Yes.
So I guess, if you... I'm just thinking about a few people that I know. I guess it could be me if I coach my sport, but I don't anymore. But it would be that if I had tried something, I felt like I've got limited tools in the toolbox, I'd take one of them out and have a go with it, and it works. And it works because I'm not super clear on what I'm trying to achieve. And so through that more sort of foggy lens, what I achieved looks about right.
Yeah.
Everyone has some fun.
Yeah.
Everyone's running about.
Yeah.
Parents aren't shouting at me or remonstrating. And people are demonstrably improving over time. Then I might think, thank God that I had that tool in my toolbox. It seems to work.
Yeah.
And when someone says, why don't we just stop using those and use something else? I mean, what would the motivation for that be? Why would you put yourself in a situation of anxiety and not knowing, uncertainty?
That's a good point.
When you've got something you already know.
Absolutely.
So I think all of this around coach development is ultimately about wanting to understand that behaviour in the context it's occurring.
Yes.
And so I feel militantly that coaches, there's a driving force, and it's frequently about people. Even when you're the coach, when you are the juice box coach, right, who is just literally just like hair drying the players, then abhorrent as that behaviour is, I'm presuming, going back to an earlier point, that what it reveals about what we believe is that it's such a wonderful feeling to win, that if I can help you win, you'll feel wonderful. I presume that must be part of the thought process.
Yeah.
And just ignoring all the abhorrent behaviours in between. But there's a reason that these things occur, and it's that gap there, right just there, that gap in understanding, which is where coach development sits, I think.
So you say then, you've described the role of a coach developer as being a sense maker. You're helping the individual make sense of their lived experience, and to maybe have an appreciation of behaviour, appreciation of their... Is that sort of what you're alluding to by saying that?
Yeah, a sense maker and an advocate, a doula, perhaps. That's a common word these days, isn't it?
When you say doula, you mean like as a dueling a dawn?
No, isn't a doula somebody somebody who goes to be with somebody who's going to have a baby, or it's like an advocate kind of word.
Okay.
So in some ways, I think it's like, so it's an advocate. I wish I'd not used the word now. It's not as good as perfect storm, is it? Or periodisation. Doula. We can edit that out, I'm sure. Just beep it. Beep it. Doula, not allowed. But it's so it is about that sense maker and an advocate, and also a bridge in some ways. I think there's that lovely poem which is called, I think it's called Poem for the Disruptors. Be a light and be a ladder and be a bridge. And Jennifer Lentfer, that's right, yes, Jennifer Lentfer, she wrote actually a poem which I think is called Poem for the Disruptors, and I think she wrote it actually for, my recollection is maybe field workers in war-torn countries or something of that nature. But I've got a heavily paraphrased version which, sort of makes it more work across domains, but there's that lovely line of, I think it is be a light and be a ladder and be a bridge. Because there's also a lot of talk in coaching about the exclusivity of language. It's something that you and anybody else who talks about coaching in the public domain will almost certainly have had some flack for at some point, or been caused to reflect on. To what extent does the language that I use to describe coaching practice prevent some of the very people who would like to be listening to be able to understand and comprehend and make sense of it? And I think that regardless of who you're working with, there's a role for that. There's this idea of the theory-practice divide, for example, which I mean, that's a whole different podcast, but I would reject that idea, really. But certainly it is true that, for example, with the people that I'm working with, there's a need to get researchers working with coaches to understand what practice on the ground looks like. But as a result of that, sometimes because of the language, then ironically, although the origins of a piece of work began on the field of play, the people on the field of play can't understand the bloody research. So there's a need for that ladder or a bridge or a light. To say, what are the implications for practice? To paraphrase, we have a piece of research here that sounds really interesting. It relates to this sport in that it's about eye tracking or hand-eye coordination or speed over short distances or whatever it is. So to paraphrase, these are the outcomes of it. Do you want to explore how we might put this into motion and put this into a practice session? But it is astonishing that is needed, but it is. But it's not a theory-practice divide. It's two languages being spoken about the same thing, and in that situation, the coach developer is the Rosetta Stone, right?
The interpreter.
Yeah.
I've often thought that. I mean, just going back to what you were saying a bit earlier on about this idea of that challenge point, and I suppose it's to do with the limitation of the medium. So you talk about social media and why people get so exercised about these things. But also, even with things like a blog or a podcast, you haven't got the opportunity for dialogue. You haven't got the opportunity to see somebody's reaction and have a conversation, which you would do in any other walk of life. What you have is a kind of a unique opportunity to impress upon somebody something, to make them perhaps go. And this is probably a difference of being a light. It is being a light, but it's shining a light somewhere. And sometimes, in order to shine that light, you've got to shine it straight in their eyes. That's horrible. Because, and I suppose it's just tactics, isn't it? And I'm not sure I'm particularly proud of some of mine in hindsight. But in the journey I've been on as what you might call an educator, I suppose, as a kind of blogger, podcaster, part of that journey has been exploring what's the way in which we might reach somebody, given we've only got an opportunity. However, most of the time it's just through genuine conversations. I'm interested in what people do. You're one of the things I find really fascinating about whenever I talk to you is you always give me pause to reflect on. And it's you're doing it. You're being the bridge. You're being the ladder. You're being the light because you're putting something in front of me and you're not forcing it on me. You're just putting it in front of me, and I'm going. I want to follow that. I want to go down that path. I want to jump on that bridge because there's something interesting there for me. So you're kind of doing it. It's clearly just what you do.
Yeah. You're saying to people, well, there probably is an alternative course of action here, but I mean that's none of my business. And of course they might say, well,
tell me more.
My business is about exploring all options, so I'm quite interested in finding out what that is.
Yeah.
But there has to be a real conviction to, all of this conversation so far has been around, recognising that all these behaviours that we see, they're absolutely 100% understandable.
Yeah.
If you understand where that coach is, what it is they believe, their journey into coaching, their aspirations, their relationships to the players, all of those things, it's entirely understandable. And then we're about offering a light or a ladder or a bridge, aren't we? Not saying, all right, I don't know if you know, but the way you're working at the moment, it's not, the evidence doesn't really support it. God, if someone said that to me, I think I would just say, I literally have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean? It's working.
Yes.
I'm working with these people.
Yes.
They're coming here every single week or every day or whatever the context is.
Yes.
I can demonstrate to you that people are demonstrably getting better.
Yes.
Do you want to show the trophy cabinet? At that stage, I mean, where would you be apart from at loggerheads and challenge with somebody? And that's not what the job is it?
It's funny. You're touching on something else which I'm really interested in. I'd love to get your views on this, which is I said recently in a session with group of people talking about talent development, and I said that talent development is the mother lode of counter-intuition. Now that is like perfect storm, isn't it?
Mother lode.
As soon as I said it, I thought that. But what I mean is
periodisation. The talent equation.
You definitely need to do my intro. So, but what I mean by that is that so in that scenario there, you're just talking about how it's getting better. They're getting better. Look at them. Look at it. We're winning. We're doing well.
Right.
Yeah. You know. And what?
Why would I go vegan for December?
Why would I go vegan for December? What? Stop it. So what I'm trying to explore, I suppose, is why would, in that context, what people can't kind of grasp is that yes, that might be working for you, but there might also be some long-term consequences. So, for example, you might have your under-11 football team winning every game, top of the league, 10-0 every game, we're brilliant, we've got brilliant structure and this, that and the other, but that could be at the consequence of those individuals' long-term development, because what you've got is a group of individuals who can adhere to a particular pattern, but they're not developing an understanding and an appreciation and an ability to problem solve and adapt. And I think often quite a lot of governing bodies, quite a lot of organisations are trying to impress upon people an idea that what might be working for you and giving you short-term gain might be causing long-term pain. It's a very, very difficult argument to make.
Conceptually very difficult. I'm minded of I'm not sure if this is well, of course it is part of our conversation, but I'm aware that ultimately people listen to this in a decontextualised way, and it's kind of unfair to talk about pictures on walls and things like that, but I'm minded of a picture that you might recognise, which is from Wiggins and Matthias what's it called? Understanding by Design. It's a book about learning. And in there's a picture that I think you all know. It's kind of a y-axis and x-axis with no labels on it. It's got a straight line which shows notionally short-term performance gains and the route that it would take. It's just an arrow at a 45 degree on the two axes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And below it there's another one that stays low for ages and ages and then shoots up even higher than the other arrow got to. And the implication of that is that there are developmental approaches to the cognitive acquisition of knowledge, skills, because it's within the cognitive domain, but it's a suggestion that you can go for those short term, just keep pushing, just keep training, and you'll get to a certain point. But of course, actually, if you play the long game, you'll get higher in the long term.
Okay.
It seems to me that argument gets applied a lot to sport. The problem is that, again, I don't know if you can visualise this, but if you break that whole picture down into small squares and you're in the bottom left-hand corner, and one person's doing one arrow and you're doing the one that's creeping along the bottom, it feels like you're doing a bit of a crap job. And if someone says to you, well, look, you've just got to hold the faith, dude, because in the long term it's going to be much better for people, and you move along one square, which let's say that's a year, and you haven't moved and the other person's doing loads better, it's pretty difficult, I would have thought, to steel yourself and say, well, no, I'm absolutely doing the right thing because Stuart said that we need to play the long-term developmental game.
That is so true. I think of my son's football coach, who is playing the long game and getting beaten 13-0 every week.
Right.
But I can see them developing and this, that, and the other. And I do it. We'll get beat as we did. We didn't win a game on the festival on the weekend. We got a draw in one. And but woo, but I'm looking at them going, ooh, I'm seeing things, but I always sometimes think I'm fooling myself. Maybe I'm just looking for the stuff. But so it does take, I have to say, it does take, and I feel for my son's football coach, because he's got exactly, in my view anyway, he's got the right things in his head, which is, care about kids. I want them to all play in different positions.
Yeah.
I want them to all have an experience of the game of football. I'm not saying, oh yes, because you're a big kid and fast, you're going to be at the back or whatever. Everyone plays different, even if that costs us the game, because I believe that their experience should be paramount and their long-term development might be something we consider. And then you lose 13-0, and it must just hit you every week in the guts. I'm not doing a very good job.
Yeah.
He plays Quidditch, right? He plays Quidditch as a warm-up. Cool, right? Yeah, I think that's cool, right? I think it's really
I'd
cool.
love to go to that.
I would as well, and the kids love it, right? And then you look at the opposite end of the pitch in the warm-up, and there's these kids doing, the classic
Foam rollers.
yeah, shoeing the chickens and all that jazz. And then they win 13-0. And you can just imagine, can't you, the uninitiated parent going, I wish my kids were doing more of that stuff, because that clearly equates with winning. So you have to be very brave and very, committed to the journey.
Yeah, and you think about brave and committed. What you really, in that moment, in that square on the grid, on that picture, in that moment where someone's shoeing chickens and you're playing Quidditch, you also have to question the rationality of somebody who can demonstrably see that what they're doing isn't right now working.
Yeah.
And they remain committed to it.
Yeah.
In many ways, you're describing also that coach earlier who is wedded to an approach.
Yes.
How logical is it in that moment to be saying, well, the thing is, I've read 4 books or 5 books or 10 books that tell me that long term these young girls or boys are going to be able to enjoy sport better. They might even stand a chance of getting better because of what I'm doing. And I think any sane person would stand there and say, well, you do know you've lost every game, right? And they physically can't do some of the things that these other kids can do.
Right.
So in that context, I think it's really normal for someone to say, do you know what, screw it, I'm just going to start, I want to get the drills out. Even though it's December and I've been sponsored £5, screw it, I'll put the £5 in the pot myself and I'll just go back to the drill.
So then, but it almost sounds to me like you think so you're saying you can understand why someone would do it, but it sounds to me like you're suggesting that actually they should.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that it's entirely rational. We have to just see it as an entirely rational approach to do that,
and not castigate it or criticise it or
And again, because of course I see everything through the lens of my job, which is as a coach developer. So what would I say? Actually you're wrong. You need to carry on doing what you're doing, or let me give you some more convoluted ideas to try. I mean, ultimately you have a person in front of you who is trying their level best to help other people. They are absolutely part of our broader helping professions. And they are saying, I have literally no evidence at this point to suggest that what I'm doing is right, and I have quite a significant body of evidence to say what I'm doing isn't working. I don't understand why I would do the most counterintuitive thing and just keep on. So it makes sense to me that people would say, no, actually I've had an experiment and I'm going to go back to what's working, and I want to beat the local village next week. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. So how then, in your world, you've got the opportunity to allow an individual to arrive at some alternatives and some different conclusions and some ideas, and you can almost, like you said before, you can be the light, be the bridge, this, that and the other. But when we're talking on a really big scale, and one of the drivers here is, can we reframe a child's sports experience from their perspective of what they might want? So my son goes along there, right, and he's like, I guarantee that they've lost 13-0. Some of those days he was in goal. He's let 5 of them in. Some of them were directly because of things he did. But I guarantee within 5 minutes of the game ending, he's on the swings with his mates, and he remembers the Quidditch. So a part of me then thinks, well, okay, so if that's the way he and others, clearly his mates are doing it too, so it's not just him, are looking at their sports experience. They're not looking at it through the lens that I might look at it, which is, flipping hell, they've lost 13-0. God, 13-0. That's awful. How terrible. I've got to think about that for an entire week. What's wrong with me? How must people be viewing me? All these sorts of things that we layer onto ourselves as adults.
Yeah.
It's forgotten. It's gone for them. And so a part of me is thinking, how do I help somebody kind of disabuse themselves of notions of what might be important? Actually, it's important to them. It's important to them as the person, not as the adult, not them as the kids. But I haven't got very much contact time to do so. So what's the means by which I'm going to try and be the bridge, I suppose? I don't know. I'm still exploring this at the moment, because I'm very mindful of the fact that you made this very good point about some people get very emotive about this stuff. And I think part of that is because some people are trying to be, and I'm being a bit of a shock jock sometimes and going, nah, don't do that, do this,
Yeah, well, actually, I recognise that latter point of being the shock jock, as you say, creating dualistic arguments, because they're a way of getting people to talk, aren't they, as well?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's a mechanism. I use that all the time. I just say, is it this or that? It's not like I believe it's this or that. It's just that I know that if I say it's this, or I say, no, it's that, and we have a conversation, we've started.
Yeah.
I actually... it's probably an awful tone for your podcast, given all of the wonderful people that you've had on who had stuff to actually say about things and stuff. But I don't feel particularly optimistic when it comes to... I don't see how those social pressures that act upon people who are predominantly volunteer coaches, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't really see how you might expect to change those.
Well, except there are people who, they write to me. I wouldn't. It's one of the things that makes doing this whole thing so worthwhile. I do it anyway just because I like having conversations like this with you.
Yeah.
But they write to me and they say, do you know what? Actually, you've given me. I felt this, but I wasn't brave enough before.
Yeah. And
now you've told me that there are other people out there like me who think the same way. So now actually I have the confidence to act on my instincts. So there's a part of me that then thinks, well, maybe there's something there. And if you do it one at a time, then that's fine. But yeah, I take your point though, because I feel it, don't get me wrong, and it's happened to me.
Yeah.
The social pressures happen, and I act differently. But at least, I suppose the difference is I've got now an opportunity to reflect upon that. Whereas if you've never been exposed to an alternative, you might never reflect on that. That is just your normal.
That's true, yeah. I'm also thinking that I wonder if a lot of the practices that are tolerated and not tolerated in grassroots sport, and in fact at any level of sport, are quite properly reflections of what's going on in broader society.
Okay.
I wonder if it does work that way round. So, for example, our formal education system has really embraced the idea of solving problems and metacognitive skills and being less autocratic and working on projects together and breaking down artificial barriers between disciplines, although that's tricky when you have to take exams in disciplines, but and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And as a reflection of that, I think at grassroots sports, and my experience of that is largely vicariously through my son. That language about problem solving, or let them sort it out for themselves, or don't tell them, well, that seems perfectly normal. That's just everyday currency now. That's what it feels like to me, because it's everyday currency in mainstream education. And so and we might look at that the way that we're dealing with lots of other social issues and issues around sex and gender, and that there's in many ways what we're doing in sport is a reflection of society as a whole, saying actually we need to change things, we want to do things differently. We've made massive leaps to it. When you think about oh my God, surely I know you want things to get better, as we all do, but it doesn't hurt, particularly as we're approaching Drill Denver to the end of the year, to reflect back on how far we've come. What did youth sport on a rugby pitch look like a decade ago compared to what it looks like now?
Pretty similar.
Okay.
In my experiences, and I'm out there quite a bit, and I do see, and I think this is perhaps why. Interestingly, I don't think most people's perceptions of what the formal education system looked like, how you describe it, is what people would think. So I think most people's perception of our formal education system is not that. It's didactic, autocratic. It's get the information, and there is a perception as well that our focus on outcomes, as in results. I'll give you an example, and maybe I've got this wrong. You might have a better perception than I have, but my son's primary school, the year sixes, as they go into the secondary school where they do their exams, and this is how the school is judged. They aren't allowed to play in any sports competitions. They play the year below, who can't compete against the other schools, because they need to focus on their exams. So to me, that suggests that our education system might not be as open. Now, I'm conscious that one. This is n equals 1.
Yeah. Me too.
And
n equals 1.
But across the board, it may well be that a lot of schools are more adopting much more what you might call learner-centred approaches. Let's say, or I don't know how to describe it even, and not a teacher-led, much more learner-led, I suppose. But I and this is my point, is I think in the grand scheme of things, I think in general, your point is, I think sports themselves and organisations have embraced these ideas, but I still don't think they've translated down, and partially probably because of the social stuff and all that. But I think there is a groundswell. People are now talking about this stuff, and I'm seeing things happening. And I see even my son's rugby coach. He's great, right?
Right.
He wants the kids to play. And he'll do various different things and all those sorts of things, and he's trying to do it in that way, and you can see that. And I can't ever fault someone for that. He's trying to say, what's the way in which I can give these kids a really good fun time? I need 40 kids there. And I'm like, it's not bad, is it? And I play quite well too, So it's like it's quite nice. I suppose what I'm trying to get to is it's a long-winded way of saying that. Is it? You said we've come a long way. You're probably right. I can be a bit negative about these things. It has come a long way, but I see so much. So my son's coach is the both rugby and football coaches. I feel like he's very lucky to have found them. They're not the norm, and so that's, I suppose, one of the drivers of this is trying to get some messages across to say there are some people out there doing some really amazing things, and I want to showcase that. I suppose, I don't know.
But you've already, anybody who listens to your podcast or engages with you in any way, or they then go on to engage with other coaches and other colleagues, what you have already raised, and I think that in itself is a step forward, is a sense that there are, I don't want to use grandiose terms for it, but it's the only 2 words on the tip of my tongue. So there are pedagogical strategies available to you. I.e., there isn't just a way of doing things.
Yeah.
This discussion, not necessarily ours, but these discussions in general raise a further awareness of the fact that you're making choices about strategies, behavioural strategies, feedback strategies, the way that you construct practice, approach practice, interact with people is about choices.
Yeah.
So that in itself, it feels to me, I suppose it's bound to. The problem is we're just in this ridiculous echo chamber.
Yes.
And in fact, one thing I notice is that it's funny. So I do use Twitter, and I use it quite a bit. I probably use it every day in some way, in truth. But I notice that every time that I tweet anything which hasn't really got anything to do with coaching, I just lose a follower.
There we go.
It is now. Yeah. Where you might have a head coach with 25 years of experience and has been gradually iterating their practice over that period of time. An assistant coach might say, well, I'd like to try something different. Okay, that's fine, you have a go. They watch the practice unfold in front of them, and then to summarise, the conversation goes something like, okay, so clearly that's not worked, has it? And but I have given you a go, so let's go back to the way that we're doing things, because you know that worked.
Yeah.
It's just an answer.
Just flicking back to something you said, I'm very conscious of this, and I do want to come back to it, because I said I would earlier on in the nature of the conversation, and I want to kind of bring us to a close a little bit, because not least of which we have empty glasses and I'm hungry.
I'm starving. I'm really starving. Yeah, beginning to like hallucinate. Yeah.
But you said something at the start which I think is really interesting, and I can't leave it, which is this idea of we don't need more sports science, we need more sports humanity. And I'd just be interested just to get you to unpack that a little bit more.
Our game's just about understanding people, isn't it? And understanding what motivates them, and indeed what motivates ourselves. That's why we sometimes change course in life, isn't it? Because we're suddenly made aware that we're doing something that doesn't really motivate us. So it's about that. There's a bit of a null argument about welfare and performance going on in the performance system at the moment. I don't think there's anyone. I can't imagine there's anyone who's turned to a assistant coach or a head coach or whatever and said, look, I mean, let's get this straight. The welfare of people doesn't matter, right? It's just about performance. No one's done that.
No. But they might have acted in ways that suggest that.
Right. And in fact, maybe someone has. I mean, I literally don't know. But I just find it harder to believe.
Sure.
But being really curious about what makes people tick and how they feel in response to our behaviours, even when they are very formalised, professionalised behaviours in a sporting system where everyone's getting paid for what they do, that is about simple humanity. Yeah. That is the building block of everything we do. It's a human endeavour. So, I mean, it's a glib statement in some way. It wasn't mine, as I said it, but I just recall it, this idea of we don't need more sport sciences, we need more sport humanity. I'm certainly not going to be the person that says that sport science hasn't given us something and doesn't continue to do so, and doesn't continue to be curious about human performance. But then actually the coach needs to be the light, the ladder or the bridge, don't they?
Yes.
And to be able to use that in order to further support and influence the relationship between athlete and coach. So we're back there straight away.
Yes.
I have a sense that people who are really marvellous in sport, and some of my colleagues in sport who are perhaps really marvellous at building relationships, really authentic, warm relationships with people, my notion is that sometimes we're not very aware of what it is that they know and what they don't. We're just aware that they're communicating with us in a way that feels really warm and authentic, and we feel motivated and we want to work with them.
Yeah.
And equally, there hypothetically might be people that we encounter who certainly are people that I've encountered who I'm very aware of what they know, but they don't really make me feel like I want to kind of get on the bus and take a journey with them. So we definitely do need a bit more sense of humanity about our work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point, and I think one of the things that I've always reflected on is when you find somebody who's like that, they've got that warmth, and that, you know, like you say, you don't necessarily notice it, but you'd certainly feel it. But one of the reasons you feel it is because it seems so strange.
Yeah. In
comparison to what is either your perception of what it should feel like, or your previous experiences of what it should feel like. It's abnormal.
Yes.
And that, for me, is the mission. For that abnormality to no longer be abnormality.
Yeah, I recognise that. recently went to a meeting. It was actually in a restaurant quite close to here one evening. I was the last one there, a bunch of people working in high performance sport. Not, I don't mean, well, I was going to say not friends. I don't mean we're not friendly. I mean, but we're working acquaintances, and we might meet 4 times a year or whatever. And I was the last one there, and as I walked in, someone said, and they meant it as nothing more than a bit of a jest and a way of getting the conversation going. But they went, "Oh, here's the arty one," and I'm not the arty one. I am somebody who just really likes to draw upon a variety of things to try and get the job done and meet people's needs. Yeah. It would be nice if it didn't feel weird. Yeah. That someone wasn't just drawing upon the physical sciences to change behaviour, and nothing beyond there was of value.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's for another episode. That whole concept. As expected, I've very much enjoyed this conversation. You're the first person in however many 70 odd episodes. Yeah. Who's literally had me unable to speak through mirth.
Funny, just funny.
And I love the way that throughout the entire conversation you've taken great glee in trying to get me back into that point of complete loss by just dropping in. And you've enjoyed that moment. But I have actually enjoyed that moment, and genuinely, I'm really pleased we could have a conversation.
Yeah.
Now look, you mentioned Twitter and stuff like that, and I know you tend to be kind of circumspect about the way you engage, and I have you on my notifications because generally, even if it isn't related to sport, there's usually something of interest that you're putting out there, and some people might decide to follow you on Drill Denver.
Yes, and my one man charitable campaign. Yeah, which I'm monetising.
Good, do so. I think you should. There's plenty of charitable good causes out there.
Yeah.
So, what I was going to say was, how does somebody find you?
On Twitter, they can find me at Noah's Old Man.
Yeah, not Noah Soldman, as I thought
Not
it
Noah
was.
Soldman. Because my son's called Noah and I'm his old man. So they can find me at Noah's Old Man.
Noah's Old Man on Twitter. Brilliant. Andrew, really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And sorry for you being so
in your bedroom
hangry.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
Well, that was a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed every minute of that, as you can probably hear from the fact that I couldn't stop laughing throughout it. I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation with Andrew, not because of the subject matter, but just because I knew I wouldn't be able to stop laughing. Yeah, I mean, what a guy! He just always gets me endless mirth. I do appreciate a couple of the points he made. I just thought were worth drawing out again, I suppose. This idea of coming towards somebody with an idea that sort of almost without the idea of that they're doing something bad or wrong or what have you like that, but just kind of exploring with them around what the opportunities are and allowing them that space to kind of identify where there might be some challenges. I also think he's really onto something with the idea of Drill Denver. You heard it here first. It makes no sense, but I still think it's great. And maybe that's going to be the new charity thing that I run out from the Talent Equation, where we do no drills in December and challenge everybody to do so and raise money for charity. And if you do drills, then you have to give money to charity. So it's a new idea, and it's a new constraint that would hopefully challenge us to reimagine the way we coach. So have a happy Drill Denver. Let me know how you got on. I hope you have a great week of coaching, and I'm looking forward to exploring more of these areas and conversations in the future.